Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where we're exploring today's digital revolution by speaking with thought leaders and business executives who are changing how the world lives, works, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is Chris Lochhead, one of our regulars here on the Digital All-Stars. Lochhead on Different is his subject, and Chris has been a multiple-time CMO at big companies, a serial entrepreneur. He is one of the world's top podcaster. I think arguably now with some of the awards he's getting, the #1 podcaster and author. He's also been an advisor to executives, coaches, category creators, a little bit of everything. Chris, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Bob. I'm glad to be back.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So everybody, if you have a look over Chris' left shoulder, there's a surfboard there at the line, I believe, from the Ramones. So we may get into a little surf talk here in a little bit. Chris, you sent over a number of things you wanted to talk about. It sounds like you're pretty pumped up. You've got some fun things going on. Before you get into some of the details, you really seem to have this bent now for things going on about digital data and where that's headed. So just give us a little backdrop on that, and then talk to us a little bit about some of these very, very cool things you wanted to discuss today.
Well, Bob, pretty much every day that goes by, I get more bullish and more excited about, you can call it whatever you want, our digital future, the data age, the digital transformation, whatever you want to call it, the digitization. But my buddy Kevin Maney, who helped co-author Play Bigger with me, his book after that's called Unscaled, and he essentially has an argument that says the internet, well, of course, was a giant revolution, and then things take a step function when we get to the cloud. And I think Kevin's really right. And here's what I'm reminded of. I remember back in the mid 90s, John Doerr of the legendary venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins at one point famously said that the internet was underhyped. And at the time, he took a bunch of heat for it, saying, this guy's investing in all these internet businesses, and he's just saying bullshit like this to kind of hype up stocks and this and that and the other. And the truth is, John was right. And here's the aha I've had lately, and of course, I want to talk to you about a bunch of these things. But the net of it is, I think the digital revolution, the data age, digital transformation, whatever we're going to end up calling this next phase that, according to Kevin, starts with the cloud, is also underhyped. And the opportunity to make a difference for humanity, to create massively valuable businesses where others didn't exist, to drive massive efficiencies and optimizations in business, in science, and in society. And I know this sounds like hype. I know it does. I know some people, I believe this, and I think the facts bear it out.
Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. And, I believe that one of the things that happens, even as so many people look at just from a business perspective on this, they try to say, like in the tech space, well, here's what existed in the traditional on-premise world. So we'll just roll that up into the cloud, and the cloud will be about that big. But exactly what you're saying, it is a multiplier in many, many different dimensions. And I think that a lot of these projections, how big these markets will be, I think they're way underrepresented, partly because they say that only about 10, 15, maybe the most 20% of the traditional systems have been replaced with cloud. But that doesn't take into account the fact that there's going to be new stuff that this cloud possibility and capability rushes into that was never possible before. It never existed. This is greenfield, to a massive degree here.
Yes. And, of late, I've learned a lot from two dear friends of mine, guys I've known and respected for almost 2 decades. Actually, Steve, I think I've known for more than 2 decades. We're doing a 2-part series on my Follow Your Different podcast on digital business. And Steve Pratt's the CEO of a new startup called Noodle.ai. And my buddy, Big Ben Rewis, he used to run the technology infrastructure for Visa and First Data, and he's an expert on massively scalable digital systems and networks, high fault tolerant. If Visa goes down, like shit gets weird fast, right? And so both of these guys have been teaching me a lot. And, there's a couple of, or a handful of ahas. The first one is that, right now on planet Earth, there's roughly 7.8 billion of us. And by 2050, which is really not that far away, there's going to be 9.8 billion. So almost 10 billion of us. So we're going to go from a hair under 8 to a hair under 10 by 2050. And that represents all sorts of things. But one question by way of example is, well, how are we going to feed everybody? And I am in no way, shape, or form an expert on ag or, if you want to call it broadly, the food ecosystem. But I'm learning some things. And there's a whole lot of innovation there. And my buddy Big Ben Rewis, amongst many other things, is advising a startup in that field called Verdant Robotics. And this outfit is trying to use big data, the cloud, sensors, cameras, and of course AI, ML, all of that good shit to transform farming. So imagine a scenario where we're able to have sensors on plants and we're able to detect temperatures and moisture levels and sort of at what level, there's this thing in farming that I didn't know anything about called chill hours. And that's the number of hours below a certain temperature. And based on the number of chill hours here in Northern California, where I live, you can sort of tell what kind of year it's going to be for produce, particularly for fruit. And it's essentially the more the chill hours, the better, because the trees sleep longer in hibernation when it's colder. And so there's all of this, what you and I might refer to as big data. And now we have all these sensors and capabilities. IoT is a very real thing. So imagine IoT meets the cloud, meets ML, meets, data to everything in this sort of wholly new imagined way of doing farming to optimize, when we do things. When do we water? When don't we water? When do we pick fruit? When don't we pick fruit? When do we add nutrients and other various things to help the plants and trees along the way? And so what we're moving to is, for lack of a better term, digital farming or smart farming or ML AI farming, right? And that represents something incredibly exciting. And I think we're going to see more and more innovation in the food ecosystem as a result of this digital revolution. And I think it represents awesome opportunities for startups to create new innovative things. But, I also think whether it's farmers themselves or whether it's larger ag companies and technology companies that, that are currently playing, we are really reimagining agriculture in the context of the modern digital capability that we have today.
Chris, there's sometimes that big changes come about when people reframe an issue or reframe a question. I think for, the fantastic job that farmers and agricultural companies do over time, but it's sort of been, I have this much food. How do I get, I have this much land. How do I get X amount of food out of that? You reframe the question, because you raised that we're going to add 2 billion people over the next 30 years. How are we going to feed those people? And Monsanto a few years ago acquired a data sciences company in the agriculture business, and it caused Monsanto to flip their mission statement to, our mission is to feed the world. So from a startup like what Ben's doing, with Verdant Robotics to some of these bigger companies, it's extraordinary how that reframing the question and scaling up to that. What about the and then you can get an education and other things like that. But it's so exciting now to see people like your buddies here and what they've been up to and so forth like that. I can understand, I guess, why this general category or these types of ideas have been so inspiring to you and really get you sort of pumped up. And so there's lots of good things going on that you wanted to mention.
Yeah, another one that my buddy Big Ben, I adore the guy. I think he's a surf buddy, and he's just one of these guys in the technology industry who's doing a lot of incredible things. One of them he did on a volunteer basis is he worked with an NGO called Save the Waves. As a surfer, He cares about the ocean and our coastal environments. And together they built a mobile app called Endangered Waves. And the aha was, what if we encouraged surfers to crowdsource data about water quality, trash levels, marine debris, changes in sea levels and coastal erosion and so forth. And it turns out there's 23 million surfers in the world. And the insight was surfers are an untapped resource for getting the quote unquote wisdom of the crowds going to tap into a whole new set of data around the ocean and the coastline. And if you could mobilize surfers to track things that they were seeing and experiencing, then we would have a data set that we would never have before. And as you know, the cockroaches run in the light. And so when we shine a light on what's going on by, in this case, creating a whole new kind of first-person data set, then information about what we can do to preserve our oceans and our coastlines and our resources changes. And, they just won this huge award for it. And he was over in London, and I don't know, I think he met the Queen, and maybe Gandhi was there. I don't know. But, very big damn deal, because here's an NGO thinking in a completely new way, what, you and I would call digital transformation maybe, but they're really, by asking totally, to your point, a totally different question, which is, how do we mobilize 23 million surfers to build us a data set around what's going on in the ocean, such that we can take great action to produce results to preserve our environment? They went off and did that.
Chris, I think that the sort of last point on that digital transformation, right? It's like the Industrial Revolution wasn't the point. The point was, how do you, put these capabilities, tools together, and also, Chris, in some ways, the dreams that people have together, right? And more, I think, especially from your buddies, some other people, this new wave of entrepreneurs I know you work with all the time, they are setting out to try to tackle a set of challenges, problems, opportunities, whatever you want to call them, in different ways. You enlist those 23 million surfers. We're going to start calling it the iOS, the Internet of Surfers, and the collective intelligence from all around the world. Pretty passionate people about what they do, and they're going to make a difference.
Yeah. Here's some other examples. My buddy Steve Pratt, this is a guy who grew up at Deloitte Consulting, ended up running the CRM consulting practice, has had a massive career in kind of what you might call strategic technology consulting. Well, he's now the CEO of this company called Noodle.ai. And they are, at a high level, you and I would call them a supply chain cloud software company, but they really rethought this whole thing. Their mission is to optimize manufacturing and supply chains, manufacturing and distribution, in a whole new way, using this new data technology, new AI and ML technology. And there's some incredible insights that I didn't realize. There's 443 billion globally in supply chain waste.
Just waste.
Because, we don't know what's where and who's here and when, and so shit goes bad. 40% of the food on the planet rots, right? 40 to 50%, and I didn't know this was a stunner, Steve taught me this, 40 to 50% of trucks on the road are empty because they're not optimized. And just that alone creates 42 billion wasted miles. So think of the cost of that, and then 97 million tons of CO2. And so they're applying, data to everything technologies, ML, AI, et cetera, to completely reimagine supply chains and manufacturing to pull out both economic waste, time waste, and of course, to try to make a difference in the environment. And so, this is an area where, by way of example, one of the companies that you and I love to shit on the most, or certainly I love to shit on the most, SAP, these guys, the old legacy guys, are not doing this, right? And so Noodle takes information from legacy ERP apps and various other apps, and of course leverages the Internet of Things and many other of the more modern technologies and pulls them all together to create an optimized environment for supply chains and for manufacturing to try to get at this problem, right? Another example that I love, I met these folks through my friends at Splunk, who, as you know, I'm very proud to be associated with, a company called Zonehaven. And what Zonehaven's trying to do, their startup, and they're trying to use all these forward-leaning technologies to fight fires. So, in California, we have this horrible wildfire problem. Of course, we've seen what's happened in Australia. It's absolutely devastating when you fire up your browser or turn on the news on TV to see that. And so what these folks have said is, how do we use all the good new shit to, number one, sense that there's a fire? Well, up until very recently, Bob, in the Sierras anyway, you know how they sensed there was a fire? They paid a dude to hang out in a tower and look around and hopefully not fall asleep and go, oh, hey, over there on the right, I think I see some smoke over there. Somebody get on a walkie-talkie and tell them to go take a look, right? That's where we've been. Well, today we can put sensors and we can put cameras and so forth, and we can IoT enable an entire region that's prone to wildfires. But they go much further than just detecting. They take geolocation data, they take population data, they take weather data, and they can begin to do things like this: make recommendations to firefighters as to where to go. Give firefighters instantaneous information on the weather, on the wind, and so there can be forward-leaning, predictive approaches to where the fire might move next. Okay, and then they can give them real-time information on traffic, on roads, and so forth, and their technology can be predictive and suggestive around how and when to begin evacuations if that's appropriate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, by having this sensing capability and kind of real-time data, you get the magical combination of firefighters on the ground doing a heroic job, leveraging modern digital technology to fight fires in real time and literally save lives, of course, and potentially billions of dollars in destroyed land and destroyed property. This shit is very exciting to me.
Not so different from what some of the folks are doing with the agriculture, right, Chris? A little more intelligent,
Yes, to me, it's all variations on a theme, right?
Yeah. So, Chris, sounds like you're fairly bullish on, I still think there's some bedwetters who get all nervous about AI and ML. It's, like with anything, if misused, it's not going to be good. But I think there's great reason for optimism.
I think so. And look, I don't want to get political. I try not to. But, there was this guy who pulled out of the Democratic race, Andrew Yang, and I found him very entertaining and actually quite endearing as a person. But I couldn't disagree with him more on, AI is going to destroy everybody's jobs. And the answer is he was very creative, and I thought it was great marketing to call it a quote unquote freedom dividend. But he's going to give everybody $1,000 to stay home and drink beer or whatever the fuck. Right. I couldn't look. Here's what I know with all due respect to that line of thinking. If you're a history major, if you study the history of innovation, from the minute we create the wheel, it starts, right? From the minute we discover fire, it starts. Look, at the time, might we have said, hey, listen, the wheel's going to get rid of all these jobs because all these people who have to haul shit around on their backs and their heads are going to be unemployed. And what are we going to do? And maybe we need a freedom dividend so that people don't have to, because now, okay, so we don't invent the wheel. Is that what we're doing? And so my point is, with all due respect to the Andrew Yangs of the world, the Luddites are always wrong, always, right? And so whether you want to talk about the wheel or fire or, is the world better off because we invented the cloud? Fuck yeah, it is, right? And so I'm enthusiastic about these things. I think the opportunity for new value creation, new business creation, and frankly, for making a difference for the humanity and the environment increases with this technology, as demonstrated by a couple of these things we just talked about. And there was this recent report that came out from the folks at E&Y. They did a survey of CEOs to find out kind of where they were thinking about AI. Well, it turns out 85% of US CEOs and business leaders are optimists about it, and 87% said they are investing in AI initiatives this year. And so the other thing that's very cool is people are getting it. People are getting on board. They're realizing there's a massive opportunity here to optimize things, to become more efficient, and not just make existing things more effective, but frankly, to reimagine and to create whole new things that who would have ever thought you could mobilize 23 million surfers to help the environment, right? But we're doing it.
Great numbers there, Chris. On the CEOs, I always wondered too, if 87% of those CEO respondents are investing in AI, I want to go talk to the 13%, say, hey, look, what's the problem here? What's the hold up? You think this is a fad? You think it's going to go away? Or, but we'll leave them to their own.
I think they do what I've done with my recent knee injury. I hurt myself about a year ago, my left knee, and I did what a lot of dudes I think do, which is just ignore it and it'll go away. Well, it turns out I need a new meniscus, so it's like, well, maybe you should get on that there, Jimmy.
Hey, it's only been a year. Wait till you get to 5 years, then you can call yourself stubborn. But for now, it's just you're just testing it. So, Chris, a brief mention a minute ago about politics, and we'll sort of leave politics over here a little. But let's say you were running something like having to do with a national election or the determination of a national political candidate for president of the United States. Would you, Chris Lochhead, rush in with an untested app?
So I just had to bring this thing up about Iowa because, look, I'm a guy who spent more than half a decade of his life trying to build and grow a company called Mercury that got its start in software quality testing. And, we had a mantra there about software quality, and it went like this: test, test, test. And then when it's in production, monitor, 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 right? And so apparently that didn't get through to the chairman of the Democratic committee in Iowa. And there's been some reports out there. They first of all, they hired a company called Shadow Inc. to build the app. Now, I don't know. As a marketing guy, I'm not sure that I would want to call my company Shadow Inc. that was building voting apps, but okay, whatever. Well, it turns out, if you read the news reports, this app was built in 2 fucking months, Bob. Now, you've been in this industry a long time. Any application, any use case of consequence, hard to get done in 2 months, right? For most companies, it's hard for them to re-engineer their homepage in 2 months. Yeah. So I don't know. And the other thing, it's sort of like, when you show up at the airport and there's long lines. Every time that happens, I go, how's this possible? They knew we were coming. They knew we were coming. And so my point is, the Democratic Party in Iowa knew this was coming. They had 4 years of advanced warning, and yet they took 2 months to build this app. And so I think it's the flip side of the excitement that I have around digital technology, which is, if we don't do it right, we're going to bung up an entire election in this case. And listen, make no mistake, what's his name now? Troy Price, the chairman of the Iowa Democratic Party, no longer has a job. And so I think, it's an important thing for us to think about as we look, as digital technology enters politics and voting. I think we have to think about this very, very thoughtfully. But I also think those of us in the business world, testing, all this new stuff is awesome. But if it blows up and we do dumb shit like build a strategic application in 2 months and don't test it, bad things are going to happen. And so on one hand, yes, go for it, move, build new apps, get digital, get on it. But at the same time, let's not forget our best practices. Let's not forget that, like, hey, maybe before this thing goes live, let's make sure it's going to work. And when we deliver it, let's make sure that we have the optimization and monitoring technologies in places that's good old-fashioned systems management in the new age, so that we can make sure that these new strategic apps that we're betting our business on, or in this case, betting an entire state's election on for one party, actually works, as opposed to screwing up, costing people their jobs. And frankly, I think it has hurt the credibility of the Democratic Party.
Didn't help it. And I don't think, Chris, that your comments there about the need to test stuff I don't think that puts you in the light-eyed category. It's just a little bit the intelligence side of the, the innovation demon here. It's got to happen. Chris, you have been just phenomenally successful 3 years now as a podcaster. The recognition you've got in a number of areas, and it has been wonderful. So and you live in, and you've helped really drive and inspire this category. But this next item that you had, I think it's an oddball thing in some way, but it shows too, again, this new type of information engagement that people have with podcasting. There's no boundaries, right? And this is a remarkable piece you've uncovered here.
This new podcast called The Harvey Weinstein Trial Unfiltered. But before I get to the specifics of that, here's the big aha for me. I hear a lot of stuff about, podcasts. There's over 800,000 podcasts. It's too late for podcasting. We're oversaturated, blah, blah, blah. Look, we just saw at the Oscars and the Grammys, 2 new young female artists ascend, this Billie Eilish and this gal Lizzo. And both of them are amazing. I particularly love Lizzo. Well, let's just think about this. How many songs have ever been recorded? How many albums have ever been recorded? Gazillions, right? And let's just take Lizzo by way of example. Did Lizzo say, oh, well, Paul McCartney's the greatest songwriter ever. He sold more records than anybody ever else will. There's no way you're ever going to catch him. So fuck it. Songwriting and music performance is finished. I'm going to go home and learn how to be a carpenter or a plumber because you can't make it in music. No, she didn't. She innovated. She did cool stuff. And these young artists are breaking and taking new ground. And how many love songs have been written, right? A bazillion, right? And they're still doing this stuff. And so my point is, I think even with 800,000 podcasts, I think we're in the first inning. That's point A. Point B, if you go back and look at the history of television, it's very illustrative to podcasting. Because in the beginning of TV, when the TV camera is created and the whole infrastructure begins to get built out, you know what the first TV shows were? They took television cameras and put them in a theater, and they essentially videotaped a play. That's where we're at in podcasting for the most part. Most podcasts are not innovative. I don't even consider them real podcasts because what they are radio shows on the internet. Just like in the beginning, we put Shakespeare plays or whatever on TV. And over time in television, people went, hey, wait a minute. The new technology opens up opportunities for new creativity that we couldn't have imagined before. And how do we, instead of taking the old and using the new technology to deliver the old, what if we actually use the technology to create something new? And then people began to innovate, and they continue to innovate to this day. And so here's the aha. Radio, like television, has a bunch of massive constraints. First of all, there's a time constraint because of cost, right? And so NPR or pick your favorite radio station, they can't have a 2-hour conversation about technology because it's too expensive, right? And then they got to edit everything and they got to do all that. So here's my point. Most podcasts, for the most part, are radio shows on the internet. They're not taking advantage of the possibilities that the new technology represents. But with all that said, let's sort of tease out this new, I've been obsessed with this new podcast. So it's called The Harvey Weinstein Trial Unfiltered. And here's the aha. 2 journalists, a husband and wife team, they're Irish as shit. Phelim McAleer and Anne McElhaney. And they've got these wonderful Irish accents. They're lifelong journalists, have this idea that goes like this. Back in the day when the OJ trial was going on, there was cameras in the courtroom, and we saw that there was some negative blowback to that. So that's not going on with Weinstein. So what do these two husband and wife journalists come up with? They say, what if we go to the trial every day, take notes, figure out sort of what happened that day, document all of it, get a transcript of what happened. And then as soon as the day ends on the trial, they sort of map all that stuff out, and they create a podcast where the two journalists sort of give you context and commentary. And then B, this is the real super innovative part. They take actual transcripts of the most seminal moments of the day, and they get actors to read those pieces of transcript to the word. And so they interstitial their dialogue, their commentary with actors reading it. And the way they do this, the trial's taking place in New York. So they get all this stuff done in New York, and then they have actors in LA read the pieces, and they stitch the whole thing together overnight, Bob. And so if you listen to Wednesday's episode, you're hearing Tuesday's commentary and Tuesday's reenactment of the exact transcripts. And so in a plus or minus hour-long podcast, they're putting you in the trial. And I actually think it's more compelling than watching it on TV live. And so, it's an incredibly engaging podcast. B, there's a whole lot of facts about this that I didn't know that are head scratchers, that hasn't been reported in the mainstream media. And so it's fascinating as a consumer to listen to this podcast, in my opinion. But most importantly, at a mega level, this husband and wife team has come up with a new category, a new paradigm for using the technology that is podcasting in a deeply innovative, groundbreaking, ground-taking way. And to me, that's indicative of the fact that we're still very early, and there's massive opportunity for innovation and creativity in podcasting. And as you could probably tell by my voice, I'm incredibly excited about that.
Yeah, Chris, I hope you'll get a chance to meet them. I've been a big fan of Phelan and Ann, some of their work in different ways. They've done movies, they've written books, they've been fiercely independent about things. And a minute ago, you mentioned the mainstream media. They're not affiliated with any big media company, and they're free then to sort of go out and create, the future that they want to see. So that I'm not at all surprised about that, very innovative approach they've taken here. But I wanted to ask you, said the trials in New York, they're in New York, and they use actors in LA?
Yeah, my understanding, if I've gotten it right, is they have a distributed team of folks who are working on the podcast, editors, producers, actors, and so forth. And it's a distributed team, and they essentially have to work overnight so that in the morning, on Wednesday morning, you get the show that is based on everything that happened on Tuesday. And so they're taking advantage of the time difference and the distributed nature of the team. They've sort of explained it, not in a lot of detail, but they've explained it bit by bit here on the podcast. And so that's my synthesis of what I think I heard them say.
All right, because so they're following the sun a little bit to use the time zones to get the actors. Because I say, there's a problem with New York actors? What is this? They've got to go to LA?
That part I don't know. Maybe I have no idea about that, but
No.
What I do know is they're working their tails off so that it can be as close to real time as possible. I think it's incredibly well done. And I also, this is a side note, there's been some criticism on their sort of how they've done this. The husband and wife sort of talk over each other and interrupt each other, and they're Irish, so sometimes they say Weinstein and Weinstein and whatever. And some people criticize them for that. And there's a casual nature to what they're doing. And to that, I say, with no due respect, go fuck yourself. I think that's fantastic that it doesn't feel overproduced. It doesn't feel like NPR. It doesn't feel like a Fox thing. It doesn't feel like a Wondery thing or whatever. It's okay that it's a little bit more casual, I think.
Yeah, geez, it almost sounds like, regular people talking about something.
Well, then how about that then?
Yeah, remarkable. And Chris, this is probably a cliche too, but the thing you're talking about, that people seeing like this is the end of innovation and all that. I think it was in around 1907. There was I'm sure a very nice bureaucrat. He running the U.S. Patent Office, and he sent a formal letter. And I know I got a copy of this somewhere, but to his boss, he was recommending. This is in 1907. There was a very cool new patent they had just given out for some sort of machine device, and he wrote a letter to his boss saying we should now shut down the U.S. Patent Office because everything that has been invented, can be invented, has been invented. So there is this ongoing theme in the human brain that we continue to think that now this is it, this is the end. And so I love your excitement and energy and enthusiasm about it, and some of the remarkable things that some of your buddies are doing, down to this thing, what's going on at the podcast, the enthusiasm among CEOs about AI and ML and other things like that. And ultimately, I think it gives us reason to be confident about, in spite of some of our dumber moments, the human race's ability to deal with stuff. So we've got this coronavirus coming up the road now, and you had maybe a closing thought about this.
As well. Generally, I'm bullish on humanity and technology, as you could tell. This one sort of dampens it down a little. And so, of course, there's also a beer called Corona. And it turns out that in January, beer coronavirus surged over 3,200% globally on on Google, and similar terms along those lines have risen by thousands of percent here. And so my fear about people confusing the beer, and I don't know if you've seen any of these funny internet memes of like people wearing face masks, pouring out bottles of Corona and the like. And so when I hear about this, I think, oh God, the people who think that the way to get rid of the coronavirus is to pour out bottles of Corona beer. Are those people allowed to vote, Bob? Are those people allowed to procreate? I think if you think that you get the coronavirus from beer, I think you should forfeit your right to procreate.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, sir. And Chris, overall, though, it is a lively world we live in. You do a wonderful job, synthesizing some stuff, bringing a unique touch and perspective to it. What's your closing thought here as you sort of pull some of these different threads together?
Well, I think the big one is I think we live at the greatest time in human history. There's no question about that. The boo birds are wrong. The quality of life on the planet has never been higher. Wealth on the planet has never been higher. Our ability to all joking aside on the coronavirus, and it's a very scary thing. However, if you look at how globally we've been able to mobilize versus how we were globally able to mobilize around SARS, it's pretty extraordinary. This thing could be much worse than it is, and we're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. So however you want to look at it, whether it's business innovation, technology innovation, the digital revolution, life has never been better. And I think for those of us in the business technology world, our limitation is our own creativity. If you look at the conversation around podcasting. And so, look, are there problems? Of course there are problems. Is there a lack of justice and injustice in our world? Absolutely. Is there economic disparity and distribution of wealth and opportunity that needs to? Of course there are. So I'm not ignorant of many of the problems that we have in our society. However, we live in an extraordinary time. And I think if those of us who are lucky enough to be living at the intersection of business and technology, I think if you're not excited, if you're not engaged, if you're not committed, you're not paying attention.
Yeah, that's a very kind way, I think, to sum up what's going on with some of those people there. Chris, fantastic stuff. Always a pleasure being with you, and really, really enjoyed it this week. I've got to run here because I got a case of Corona beer that I got to get rid of. I just heard that it's deadly, so I got to go dump that. But great to see you, my friend. Look forward to seeing you next month, Chris.
Thank you, brother. Love you.
All right, and All you folks out there, thank you so much for being with us here at Cloud Wars. We look forward to seeing you next time. Make it a good month, and we'll see you soon.